can always say, well, I'm prioritizing my blood sugar. Okay, but what does that look like for your waistline?
Hey everybody, it's Adele Frizzell here today, and I am with Coach Tiffany,
Hi
and
guys.
it's been a while. Today we're going to talk about the glycemic index and how to master your blood sugar. This Facebook Live was prompted by a client who asked how important it is. Some people are wearing continuous glucose monitors nowadays in the hopes of losing weight by mastering their blood sugar. We don't feel that is necessary for people unless they are diabetic or their doctor has advised them to do so. We want to talk about how to master your blood sugar, what the glycemic index is. Does it really matter? What are some of the pitfalls to do with it? We actually have a few things we want to discuss, like how does consuming high or low GI foods affect you? How can you manage your blood sugar levels more effectively? How do cravings work when it comes to the glycemic index? And should you banish sweets from your life? I bet a lot of you know already. Basically, it's a measurement of your blood sugar, how fast it can be raised after you eat some carbohydrate-containing foods. So its impact on your blood sugar levels on a scale of 1 to 100. So every food gets graded that way. And this is a 40-year-old paradigm that has become controversial, actually, among nutrition scientists and medical practitioners. The index actually ignores many factors and how quickly these carbohydrates are digested and absorbed. It doesn't look at other factors like how foods are grown, how foods are manufactured, how foods are cooked and stored, the serving size, the combination of foods that are eaten as part of the meal. It also doesn't account for blood glucose responses in individuals because it can be different for different people, or even the same person on different occasions and at different times of day, even though these people may be eating the same foods. So the responses can be really, really different. So let me just back up a little bit and talk about the glycemic index, right? It's not, as you can sense, as all powerful as people make it out to be. And it's not something you're going to find on food labels. It's not something people typically pay attention to, but it is associated with these irresistible cravings that people have, starchy, sugary carbs. And I mean, those are things that we all crave if we're being honest. Those foods tend to rank high on the GI scale. When we look at that GI scale, again, the glycemic index ranks food from 1 to 100 based on how rapidly they cause a blood sugar level to rise when eaten alone on an empty stomach. Notice I said eaten alone on an empty stomach. And often people don't eat these foods in isolation on an empty stomach. Typically, we have food that's still undigested from our previous meal in our stomach. So obviously that's going to affect things. But according to the Mayo Clinic guidelines, you can classify food based on their GI score. And so foods that are scored 70 or higher are considered higher glycemic index foods. Foods between 56 and 69 are medium glycemic index foods, and foods that are, scored 55 or lower are considered lower glycemic index foods. So let me give you some examples of those numbers. A baked russet potato has a glycemic index of 111. Yeah, over 100. How is that even possible when the scale goes from 1 to 100, right? White rice, 89. Apple, 39. Carrots, 35. Peanut M&Ms, you won't believe it. Have a guess. Tiffany, any guesses?
Oh, peanut M&Ms. I'm going to say 45.
Good one. 33.
Oh.
So, there are people who are saying, they're cutting out fruit because they believe that, fruit is a high glycemic index and it'll spike their blood sugar, maybe cause them to gain weight. Apples are low glycemic foods. Fruit is generally low to medium glycemic. Peanut M&Ms, you wouldn't think the candy would be a low glycemic food, but it is. So here's the kicker. The GI of each food is measured when eaten alone, as I mentioned. But how often do you consume foods in isolation? So it's really essential to consider the glycemic load of your entire meal or your snack, especially since we usually eat a combination of foods. For instance, eating a plain baked potato will cause a swift spike in blood sugar. But let's be honest, how many of you actually eat a naked baked potato. Most often you're going to be adding toppings, right? Butter, sour cream, maybe bacon bits or whatever. These food items are going to slow down the rate of absorption and lower the glycemic load of your meal. So eating higher glycemic index foods alongside a mix of protein, carbs, and fats can reduce cravings. And also, when you think about it, that there's some wisdom there in saving dessert for after you've finished your dinner. You want some ice cream, you want a sweet. If you mix that with the other foods, you don't really have to worry too much about the glycemic index of that dessert because you're eating it with other foods. Go ahead.
Something real fast. Something here that it kind of just makes me think of is you're mentioning how you can eat things on their own and the glycemic index is going to be higher, but whenever you mix it in with something else, it's going to be lower. So it's kind of like comparing mountains with hills, right? You've got this one lone hill and you're just trying to focus on this one lone hill, whereas you also have this mountain range where all of these things are coming together, right? And whenever they come together, they work together better. They are more massive, more beautiful when you stop to look at the mountain ranges as well versus one hill. Or it's kind of also like just
not seeing the forest for the trees.
Yeah, not seeing the forest through the trees. You're focusing on the one thing versus focusing on all the other things that are working with it.
Yeah, exactly. So like the glycemic index is a measurement created in a lab in fasted subjects, given a certain amount, a certain portion of, quick digesting carbohydrates. Rarely in real life are we in those lab-like conditions. So let's delve deeper into glycemic load, because I think this is a more significant metric. Let's take an example, watermelon and a donut. Now imagine you're craving a snack and you're considering these two options. Surprisingly, they have very similar glycemic indexes. Watermelon rates at 76, just as high as a donut on the glycemic index scale. Shocking, right? But here's where the difference lies. A serving of watermelon gives you 11 grams of carbs, while a regular donut packs about twice as much, 23 grams of carbs. So it's easy to see your choice isn't just about the glycemic index. That's where the concept of glycemic load comes in. It takes both the quality, the glycemic index, and quantity, the actual amount of carbs that is in your food, into account. And calculating glycemic load isn't rocket science. You take the GI of a food, remember it's 1 to 100, usually, multiply it by the amount of carbs in a serving and divide that total by 100. And that result is the glycemic load. So for a standard food serving, you might consider it high if the glycemic load is 20 or more, and intermediate 11 to 19, and low if it's 10 or less. So let's go back to our watermelon and donut example. Despite having similar glycemic indexes, watermelon is a clear winner in the glycemic load category. A serving of watermelon has a glycemic load of 8. The medium donut is way up there with a glycemic load of 17. So keep in mind, this isn't just about individual snacks, it's about your overall diet. Your dietary glycemic load is the sum of glycemic loads for all the foods that you munch on. So in a nutshell, when it comes to blood sugar and your favorite munchies, it's not just about the glycemic index, but also the amount of carbs you're tossing into the mix. And we're not saying carbs are bad either. We're going to talk about that. But next time you reach for a snack, remember the story is both quality and quantity. And we mustn't overlook the importance of evaluating a food's overall nutritional value. So take sweet potatoes as an example. They have a high glycemic index of 70, but they are packed with nutrients. And on the other hand, sugary treats like peanut M&Ms have a lower glycemic index of 33, but lack the health benefits of sweet potatoes. So the key takeaway here is that glycemic index is only part of the puzzle. Cravings are also a complex matter, and they aren't solely determined by glycemic index of individual foods. People say, I am addicted to sugar, I'm addicted to this. Factors like a food satiety level, the taste or enjoyment factor, and how it's consumed, they all play a substantial role in how much we eat or crave a particular food. So I hope that sheds some light on the glycemic index and what it actually means for you and your cravings and your results. And if you're not dealing with diabetes, there's really no need to let the glycemic index worry you. As you dive into your fitness and your wellness journey, remember, there's much more to consider than this single metric. Is there anything you wanted to add there, Tiffany?
No, I think you nailed it. I think that, just again, not getting so stuck on one point and creating that overall balance is going to help just take a lot of the stress off the foods that you're eating, first of all. And then I love the comparison between the watermelon and the donut, because we wouldn't typically look at a watermelon and go, oh, which one do I think is healthier for me? Well, if I base it off of the glycemic index, they're rated the same. So
Mhm.
obviously that means that I can have the watermelon on top of the donuts, you know? So that's
Mhm.
not really something that we would typically do, because realistically, based on our knowledge, we know that that watermelon is going to be significantly fewer calories. It's going to also be less processed, you know? So whenever you look at that, it's like comparing completely different things. So just being mindful of the glycemic index is not a magic answer. Some things can be rated higher, some things can be rated lower, and the actual nutritional breakdown of that food should be taken into consideration as well before just being dismissed because it was assigned a number based on a fasted state.
Yeah, based on something that isn't really real world conditions, you know?
Mhm.
So the next question is, how can you manage your blood sugar levels more effectively? And do you want to talk a little bit about that,
Well,
Tiffany?
yeah, I've got some great thoughts here. So the first thing that I really think of is one, just creating that balance with your overall meals. So something that comes to mind is if you're having breakfast, how can we create that breakfast or that balance with your breakfast? Well, you could choose, I'm just going to have a plain bagel. Well, that's a high GI food all on itself. But if you take that same bagel and you add some cream cheese to it, it's going to help reduce how high it is on the GI scale. So option one, eating the plain bagel on its own, it's like throwing a piece of paper into a campfire. It burns quickly and it's going to give you a rapid spike of energy, right? Option two, add a little cream cheese to it, which has also got fats in it. And to the plain bagel, it's going to slow down the digestion and the absorption of the carbohydrates from that bagel. So it's kind of like placing a piece of paper on the campfire with a bit of damp wood. It takes longer to catch fire and provides somewhat steadier source of energy. So it doesn't immediately go up in flame. It slows that process down. So you still get the release of the energy. It's just not as rapidly. It doesn't hit you quite as quickly. Now, another approach would be instead of having that plain bagel, have a slice of bread, which is a lower GI food typically. And then you can also top that piece of bread with peanut butter. Keep in mind the peanut butter is going to contain some proteins and some fat. So you also have to be mindful of the overall calories of what you're doing as well. So for option three, choosing the lower grain bread with the peanut butter on it is it's like placing a log on the campfire. It's going to be slow and steady. It's going to take longer for it to light, to ignite. And then once it does ignite, it's going to give you that nice smooth burn and things are going to be released in a way to where you don't have that shock to your system if you are sensitive to sugar intake. It's going to take it longer to have that immediate spike, or it's going to take you longer to have that blood sugar spike. And typically it's going to minimize the spike altogether because again, it's long and slow. So you can kind of see how the glycemic index of the foods can be influenced by the presence of other macronutrients. Combining carbohydrates with fats or protein can lower the overall glycemic load of your food. And then that's going to slow down the response of the meal, leading to more stable and sustained energy levels, which can be particularly beneficial for maintaining your steady blood sugar levels. And again, this is something that's really important to focus on, especially if you are diabetic, pre-diabetic. Maintaining your blood sugar is going to be vital. I also really want to point out that if you're having the 100 grams of peanut butter, it's going to be higher in fats and calories. So you, again, just being mindful of the total calories that you're consuming. If you have 100 grams of peanut butter, it's roughly 597 calories, whereas 100 grams of cream cheese is 351 calories. So by making those swaps out, you also have to make sure that they fit in your overall nutrition plan throughout the day, because you can always say, well, I'm prioritizing my blood sugar. Okay, but what does that look like for your waistline? We can prioritize our blood sugar and add these foods to reduce the glycemic index, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to fit within our calorie goals.
Yeah, and some people are, really concerned about their blood sugar, and so they're hyper focused on the type of food, but we have to also be concerned about calories and quantity of foods being consumed. We work with clients who eat healthy and don't understand why they can't lose weight. Typically, it's a lot of nut butters, nuts, and things like that. Healthy, but a high fat diet. And honestly, losing weight can really help with people's insulin sensitivity. We have worked with clients who've been pre-diabetic and are no longer pre-diabetic after a weight loss. So these are all things we want to consider if we are concerned about managing our weight. All right. So I wanted to talk about this question. Should you banish cake, chocolate, or sweets from your life entirely, or is there a more balanced approach? You can probably guess our answer. we believe that in all the foods, right? It's a hashtag we use, all the foods, unless there's a medical reason you should not eat a food. But if you eat, for example, a sweet after a meal rather than in isolation, your blood sugar will not spike as if you had eaten just that treat on its own on an empty stomach. And I wouldn't be concerned about this eating sweets at all if you don't have any blood sugar issues, if you're not pre-diabetic or have diabetes. Also, if you go for a walk, you can lower your blood sugar levels by 6 to 40%. So going for a walk after a meal is a great idea. Even a 10 or 15 minutes can lower your blood sugar. Keeping a healthy body weight is also going to help your insulin sensitivity. And just a little plug for exercise, because, if one bout of exercise can increase your insulin sensitivity by up to 50%. And this can last up to 72 hours, which is a good reason to lift weights or train at something that is kind of strenuous, at least 3 times a week. If you're concerned about your blood sugar, I urge you to focus on more than just the glycemic index of certain foods. Consider, having well-balanced meals that have protein, carbs, fat, and fiber. Consider movement and exercise. So important for that. Yeah, I can't emphasize that enough. Is there anything else we wanted to discuss, Tiffany?
The other thing that we really wanted to touch on was, cravings, but I think that you already covered that pretty well, and how it's not just tied to the glycemic index, but also to your satisfaction. We want
Right.
to make sure whenever we're eating specific things, we're generally looking for that sense of satisfaction. And then also how sometimes whenever we eat things, it causes us to force our bodies to pause, rest, and digest. Did you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So, because I think some people, for example, they'll say, I'm really sensitive to carbs. If I eat carbs, I crash after. And I want to talk about that. That could be true. Definitely. But I also want people to be aware that there's something called postprandial somnolence. And it is this normal state of drowsiness following a meal. That meal could be a big pasta meal, or it could just be a mixed meal. Regardless, there's 2 components to postprandial somnolence. One is a general state of low energy related to activation of the parasympathetic nervous system. Or 2, the other component is this extra mass in your gastrointestinal tract. And this can also cause some sleepiness. So this matters because I think a lot of people are under the assumption that the carbs cause that. And sometimes it might have been simply too large of a meal. It's very easy to overconsume pasta. It's slippery, easily digestible. And so it's the size of the meal, the portion size, that actually led to this postprandial somnolence, this state of drowsiness after a meal. And this happens in people who are not sensitive to carbs or, have to worry about their blood sugar. It's a very normal human state. And so I just want people to be aware of what they think might be special is actually normal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Just because you think that it might be a sugar rush, maybe it's not. Maybe it's your body just telling you, we need a minute to digest this big, big meal that we just ate.
Yeah. It's also, this parasympathetic nervous response is referred to as the rest and digest response. And I want to talk about this. It's something we discuss with our transformer clients, that sometimes people who are stress eaters, the reason why they stress eat is because their adrenals are maxed. They're in a high stress environment. They're in a sympathetic state. They eat something, and then that engages the rest and digest response, the parasympathetic nervous system. It calms them down. So in a way, like eating food because you're stressed is a great coping mechanism. Like it works. It calms people down, right? It's like you were all gas, no brakes. Now you eat something and it's putting on the brakes. Obviously, the long-term consequences of always stress eating aren't good for our health. So we need to find other ways to rest and relax and engage our parasympathetic nervous system that aren't loaded with calories. Meditation, going for a walk, petting an animal, some deep breathing, things like that. Non-food related relaxing activities are so important. I think that's all I got. All right.
I think that's it. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to drop them in our comments below. It looks like Joan just said, she said, is that what they call food coma?
Yeah, exactly.
Basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very, very similar to that turkey coma that might be coming up for some people.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Oh,
thanks for tuning in today. Let us know if you have any other questions for future Facebook Lives. Take care.